Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's really great to be with you today. My name is Catherine and I'm a manager in the knowledge and technical team here at A4S. So in today's session, we are going to be looking at how to incorporate sustainability considerations into Capex decisions. So please note that we are recording the webinar for others and it will be made available on our A4S YouTube channel later this month or next month. There are 3 learning objectives for this webinar. So after completing today's event, you'll be able to firstly articulate the business case for embedding social and environmental considerations into Capex decisions, including how this can support long-term value creation and risk management or mitigation. Secondly, to understand practical approaches and key steps for adapting Capex decision-making processes. And thirdly, draw on real-world experiences and examples of others when examining and modifying Capex decision-making processes in your own organisation. Please note that throughout the session, we will be running a few poll questions, and that will need to be completed in order to gain CPE points. The webinar will last around an hour. Now, I appreciate we've sort of started a little late, so hopefully that won't impact on you too much. So we're firstly going to provide a brief overview of the key elements of integrating sustainability considerations into Capex decisions, followed by a discussion with Pei-san from OFI and Christy from Sydney Airport, where they will share their own experiences and practical insights. There will be some time for Q&A at the end, so please do put your questions in the chat function and we will do our best to answer them. So embedding sustainability factors into the Capex process helps to provide a strategic alignment of capital investments, improved risk management, and the attraction of investment and lower cost of capital, all of which result in more informed investment decisions. So when embedding sustainability into your Capex process, it's important to consider the key drivers. So there are a number of drivers, both external and internal, that shape a company's approach to Capex, and identifying these will help you to identify and prioritize the changes that are needed. So Capex decisions can be heavily influenced by external factors. So this could be financial, such as funding and access to capital. So for example, if you raised finance via a social bond, you'll need to ensure that the funding is deployed to projects that meet the required criteria. So financial opportunities may also arise from cost savings and long-term increase in asset value. So for example, if you screen locations for exposure to climate-related physical risks, you might avoid investing in property that may later be damaging or damaged by flooding. The regulatory landscape also plays a very key role in shaping the process. So for example, companies in scope for CSRD also required to disclose certain sustainability KPIs, which include the proportion of the Capex allocated to sustainability-related projects. So the process may also be driven by internal factors. So this could be leadership and buy-in and advocacy for the development of an integrated Capex approach, or company values that focus on long-term value creation for wider stakeholders. Companies might also set sustainability targets and need to align the Capex decision-making to this. For example, if a company has set net zero targets, choosing to invest in lower emitting assets will help them to reach their ambition. So these are covered in more detail in the A4S Capex deep dive, which should appear in the chat function later in this session. Finance teams are already heavily involved in the Capex process, which means that they are really effectively positioned to drive the integration of sustainability. So in the A4S Essential Guide to Capex, we outline 4 elements that should be considered when integrating sustainability factors into Capex decisions. So firstly, you need to consider who to involve. So this includes the governance across the process. So this should be structured in a way that encourages an open mindset and promotes accountability. Secondly, you need to think about what to assess. So this step helps to identify and prioritize the sustainability factors that should be considered based on the type of factor, such as environmental, social, and the stage within the life cycle. So analysis should cover the whole life cycle of the asset, with the potential of extending this to the wider value chain, providing a more holistic approach to Capex decisions. Thirdly, you need to think about how to assess this. So there are various methods that can be used to assess the priority sustainability factors. So this could be done qualitatively through the use of written explanations describing the importance of improvement, or by narrative-based ratings, such as high, medium, low scoring of impacts and risks. Assessments can also be quantitative, so this can be either through non-financial or monetary terms. So this could be water usage in cubic meters for a non-financial. And for example, in monetary, companies can include a shadow carbon price into their Capex investment appraisal process. By including emissions in monetary terms, this helps drive decisions in favour of low emission options and helps avoid or reduce future offsetting costs or potential carbon taxes. And lastly, you need to think about how to decide. So decision makers will need a framework to make sense of the assessment, to choose between Capex projects and to explore funding options. So as we've seen, the drivers and methods of assessment can vary quite significantly based upon the specific circumstances of each country. And I'm very excited to hear more from our guest speakers about their approach. So I'm now just going to introduce our guest speakers, Christy and Paysan, for today's webinar. So Paysan is Head of Cost Transformation at OFI. Paysan is responsible for driving cost optimization and transparency to deliver sustainable growth. Prior to this, Paysan worked as a manager within OFI's corporate FP&A team, and prior to this, over 12 years with supply chain finance and FP&A teams at Mondelez. Paysan was also part of the 2023-24 A4S Academy cohort, and her implementation plan focused on the implementation of a Capex ESG risk framework and the integration of material sustainability topics into the Capex appraisal process. Christy is a General Finance Manager in Commercial Capital and Operations at Sydney Airport. Christy is responsible for organisation-wide capital management and governance, procurement and business partnering with the operations and aviation teams to support their strategic initiatives and decision-making. Christy held roles previously as Head of Property at Big W and General Manager at David Jones. Christy was also part of the 2023-24 A4S Academy cohort, where her implementation plan focused on embedding sustainability requirements into Sydney Airport's capital governance framework, a stage-gate approach to capital investment decisions. So a very warm welcome to you both. So I will now hand over to Helen, who will be leading the discussion with Paysan. So over to you, Helen.
Great, thanks, Catherine, and welcome both. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be hearing from Paysan first, who will be providing some practical insights into OFI's approach to integrating sustainability factors into the capital and risk framework. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions. So just firstly, I wonder if you could tell us a bit of about why OFI actively incorporates sustainability considerations into the capital appraisal process and how this fits with the broader kind of strategy.
Sure. Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Catherine, for the invitations. Really, really glad to be here to share what we're doing over here and OFI. So in OFI, sustainability is a very important pillar of our company strategy and our purpose to be the change for good food and a healthy future. So incorporating sustainability criteria into our Capex decision making is actually one of the ways to enable our management to make more holistic, informed, and responsible investment decisions, and to help enhance our asset resilience against environmental risks in the long term. So that is an important consideration for us when we started thinking about having this Capex ESG risk framework. But I wanted to share as well that even prior to the launch of this risk framework, we do have a separate assessment form that is called the Environmental and Social Impact Assessment that we use for Capex projects. But we wanted to have actually a more structured and comprehensive integrated framework that integrates the environmental, social, and governance factors into the investment evaluation criteria. So in my discussion with my head of finance for sustainability and our get analysis of our existing process, which is very traditionally focused on financial evaluation of our Capex projects. So we identified this as a priority to implement and our existing capital appraisal process. So that's important consideration for us when we identified the gap. So the key consideration for us when we were thinking about what's critical as a key consideration is how it fits into the wider OFI strategy. So we have recently just launched the OFI sustainability strategy called Choices for Change, right? And within this Choices for Change strategy, we have identified our 2030 sustainability targets. So we have used this as the compass and the guiding principle in terms of what key criteria we use in the setup and the structuring of our Capex ESG risk framework. So as an example, it is within our 2030 sustainability target to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions under our climate action target. So this is one key consideration that we've built in. All the key material sustainability areas that we have to consider are actually built within our framework. So it's an integrated exercise for us when we built the framework.
Great, thank you. And it's so important. And yeah, as a kind of very mature reporter, it's interesting to hear that kind of evolution and how it's kind of progressed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been really involved in that integration process. So what approach did you take and what steps did you take to ensure that there was kind of effective buy-in? Because sometimes these things can be quite difficult to kind of embed within the organization.
Yeah, so I think when I started off in building that framework, I started with like I shared with the sustainability strategy, our choices for change strategy. So I identified all the material areas within our strategy and tried to build a framework around it. But obviously, not all the sustainability strategy areas could be relevant for assessing a capital appraisal project. So in that development, I spoke to many different stakeholders to try to get their input in terms of what is going to be practical for them in the evaluation process. So I didn't want that framework to be a theoretical exercise for our project engineers and project lead. And I wanted them to recognize and use the framework in a practical and tangible manner. So in order to do this, we took a real greenfield Capex investment project and applied our ESG risk framework to it. So in this process, actually, we identified a lot of shortcomings in that framework. And my project engineer gave me a lot of advice and practical inputs in terms of what is too theoretical and to be applicable in the operating environment for the project team. So there was a very iterative approach that I took when I was building that framework. So a lot of people was opinions I tried to seek. Right, and I had a lot of cross-functional support as well from the organization, including my global engineering team, and I have our strategy, investment and business development team, who is actually the gatekeeper and the key stakeholder that I have, who manages the whole Capex investment process before it goes to our CEO and CFO. So I engage them as well in terms of what is going to be practical and important for our senior management in this consideration. So a lot of like cross-functional team was involved. And I also seek support from our sustainability impact team, our in-house sustainability experts in the process. So I think it's extremely critical in the process to engage the various stakeholders and to identify the people who are involved in the Capex review process. But I think in this process, it also is important to identify who has been left out of the process. So in this built up of the process, I also realized that actually the sustainability team is not involved at all in this decision-making chain, right? So one important thing that we did within the process is to bring in our BU sustainability head to be involved and provide his advice as well, and to provide his sign off on the Capex CSG framework. So there was a lot of iteration, but I would say that it is important to apply it to a real practical example and to test it out and see if this is going to be practical and relevant for the people on the ground, and that it's not really a checklist exercise and an additional step that the project team has to go through. So a lot of engagement, I think, should be there prior to the framework going live. So I think that would be the approach.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some really practical tips in there to just kind of align as much as possible with the people who are making those decisions and the process that's in the
exactly.
pipeline, but also embedding the sustainability within that process. So yeah, really practical tips there. Thank you. And could you give us a couple of examples of the kinds of environmental considerations that are embedded in that process and how they've been factored into the assessment and approval process?
Yeah, so I think maybe to share a couple of examples would be the carbon emission intensity, water usage, and the waste to landfill matrix that we have incorporated into the Capex CSG risk framework. So these matrix have been added also because it has a lot of relevance within our sustainability choices for change strategies. So these are matrix that we do report externally. So we wanted to bring it into the framework so that our operational team is aware and sensitive to these particular matrix when they are putting in a particular Capex project. So as an example, for our Capex emission intensity criteria, we built a carbon emission calculator within that risk framework to enable the engineering team to calculate for this particular, as an example, if the Capex project is to put in a new processing line. So we enable the engineers to build in a forecast, an estimate of what is the potential carbon emission of this production line. So basis existing benchmarks that we have within the manufacturing environment. So once they calculate the estimated carbon emissions intensity, we provided a benchmark to the team, and the criteria is that the new investment that we put in should not worsen our carbon emissions intensity target. So that's a particular matrix that we put in. So in the event that there is going to be an investment that is not carbon efficient, then we will request for a mitigation action prior to even that the project being executed. So there is this pre-assessment process that we do now as a result of this new framework. So similarly for the water usage intensity, so it is important for us that within our manufacturing environment, water usage is being monitored. So we do have a benchmark within OFI where there is a base level of water intensity that each of the operations will have to be measured against. So we do have a year-on-year improvement criteria for our manufacturing entities. So we want them to be aware that for every new investment that we put in, it has to improve this particular matrix. So that's the purpose of having these kind of environmental matrix built in within that framework. So, and maybe to share another simple criteria that we built into this framework is a very simple scoring system. So we scored each of the sustainability criteria at a high, medium, or low sustainability risk basis our risk measurements guidelines. So maybe following the example that I've given related to carbon intensity. So if this particular investment improves our carbon emissions within that manufacturing facilities, as an example, we are putting in solar panels on our warehouse. So it's going to bring down the carbon intensity of that particular manufacturing facility. So in that case, that's going to be low risk for this particular project, and we give it, as an example, a score of 1. But if it's going to worsen the carbon intensity of the particular facility, then we'll give it a score of 3, which is a reflection of the high risk of the nature of the investment. So eventually, we give a scoring criteria to each of the sustainability matrix that we put into the framework, and if it is an average score of 2, eventually then we'll say that, okay, this is an average risk project. So I think eventually when it goes to our BU sustainability head for eventual review and signed off, he can give his comment on if there is some mitigation actions that we can do prior to even putting that Capex project up for review to the senior management team. So that's an intervention that we have put in with the risk framework, so that our sustainability expert in-house can give a comment from the sustainability lens, because otherwise I think traditionally it's always very much driven by financial factors and strategy. So these are the overriding principles that we have. But I think with the risk framework, I think it's good that we have a sustainability perspective brought in to give that guidance to our operations team as well. So I think that's how we went about bringing in that sustainability perspective to the risk framework. I think that there are a lot more. I think that I can also give maybe just quick example on the UDR, because within OFI, our business, we're in the business of our key product will be coffee and cocoa, which is also within the UDR, deforestation regulation framework. So it's also something that we have brought in to our risk framework, where we require the local team to take a look at whether there is an impact of this particular regulation on our project if it relates to an investment for cocoa and coffee. So that particular criteria is brought in as well to kind of bring that awareness to the local team. If there is any impact, then we have to put in any mitigation action and identify what to do before we go ahead with that investment. So
Great,
that's
thank
the
you.
other
Some really,
example I can share.
yeah, really practical kind of methodologies there, and
Mhm.
aligning it with your kind of carbon trajectories and water usage requirements is really interesting kind of
Mhm.
tip. Thank you. And could just, I mean, you touched a little bit on how it's kind of shaping decisions, but I wonder if you could expand a bit more on how this is kind of
Mhm.
the outcomes you're seeing and how these factors are shaping and informing your decision.
Yeah, so maybe that's I'll share a little bit about the scope where the Capex risk framework applies. So it applies only for our major projects. So not all of our Capex projects has to go through this particular risk framework. Only the major one that is above more than $2 million. So there's a cutoff that we put in for material investment. So at the moment, I think since we launched it mid of last year, around less than 10 projects so far, I think have gone through this particular framework. But I think I will give a real example of where this framework actually has has an impact in the discussion of the project. So we have this greenfield project that we're implementing in Latin America. So I think within that project, there was an assessment that the project team has done locally with the local government. And when we compared the assessment of the local government with our risk database, there is a contradiction, right? So I think it was a good discussion that we had with our project team in terms of where a risk factor is kind of like showing up within the risk database, and in this particular case is relating to water scarcity and water stress in the place where we're trying to implement the project. So from the government's point of view, the assessment that came out was that there are no water stress within that particular area that we are going to invest in. But on the other hand, our external database from our sustainability experts is telling us something else. So I think it just kind of points out this particular sensitivity within the different kind of risk assessment that we have across the different sources. But I think it does spark a different kind of discussion that we can have with our stakeholders, that, okay, maybe we should look at a more broader kind of assessment of where we're looking at, because the local government could be looking at something that is within that is very local because it is within a particular industrial estate. But I think our external risk database is actually looking at a more like macro perspective of where the water stress could come up, right? So I think that's something that actually was brought this discussion that we have with our project team. So I think that's something that actually added value to the risk assessment, I think, for that particular project. So I think that is one practical example, I think, where we really made an impact for us. But I think this particular framework is going to have an impact, I think, when we have a greenfield project, because currently most of our investments are going towards existing manufacturing facilities where risks are much lower in those past projects that we have kind of assessed under this particular risk framework.
Yeah, really interesting to hear that difference between kind of the localized assessments and the more regional kind of global forward-looking assessments, and actually the importance of kind of taking both into account. So thank you for that kind of insight. Yeah. Just in the interest of time, because we're going to move on to a discussion with Christy, who will be giving us a bit of an insight into Sydney Airport sustainability factors and how they have been incorporated into the Capex framework and the impact that that's had on Capex decisions. So welcome, Christy. With growing attention on the aviation industry and the viability of future investments, could you tell us how Sydney Airport are considering sustainability factors as part of the Capex investment process?
Sure, thanks, Helen. As you've alluded to, there's a lot of pressure on the aviation industry to reduce carbon emissions. Air travel is a highly carbon-intensive activity, and Sydney Airport, we do take our role to reduce carbon emissions very seriously. As part of our sustainability framework, we have 3 key pillars. The first one being a responsible business, second one being planning for the future, and the third one being supporting our people and communities. Within the responsible business pillar, we have our commitment to being net zero by 2030 for our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And within our planning for the future pillar is our commitment to developing minimum 5-star Green Star buildings and also supporting a sustainable aviation fuel globally by 2030. So to support that sustainability framework, we've developed a capital governance framework that considers environmental sustainability in each phase or stage of the capital process. And what you're sharing now on screen is a summary of that capital governance process and the 6 stage gates that each capital program must go through in order to progress first through the gates and also get their funding released as well. As an infrastructure business, we are capital intensive with a capital plan that will deliver, to name a few of our major programs, terminal expansions, runway resheeting, car parks over the next 10 years or so. And historically, our capital governance framework was focused just on capital efficiency, so doing the right projects at the right time as cost effectively as possible. Whilst those principles still hold today, we've expanded our capital governance framework to ensure environmental factors are also considered and addressed right from project ideation, so right at that initiation, so stage gate 0, through to operational readiness of the project. What that ultimately means is that there are environmental sustainability requirements that the project must address before moving through each of those stage gates and ultimately receiving its funding. And these requirements, these sustainability requirements, bear just as much weight now as the financial requirements within this framework.
Great, thank you. And that's a really interesting overview, which is quite helpful, I think, for put it into kind of context for finance teams. And so what was the role of the finance team in implementing that framework? And what steps did you take to ensure that it was a successful take or implementation?
The finance team led the creation and implementation of the airport's revised capital governance framework. Within finance, we have a capital team that's responsible for the capital governance, assurance, and financial management of the airport's capital expenditure. And so it was their job to develop the framework with the business and make sure it was fit for purpose and also implement the process. The development and implementation of the framework took about 6 months in total from start to finish. During that 6-month period, we first spent a lot of time with the key stakeholders. So that's really first at the C-suite level, just to ensure that we were clear on what their expectations were. They're the ultimate decision makers when it comes to our capital expenditure and decision making. And so we wanted clarity on direction before engaging too heavily with the broader business. So once we had this clarity, we then engaged with the broader business to develop the set of requirements at each phase of the capital governance process. And so as you've shown previously, we do have a 6-stage gate framework. Each capital project must go through each of those gates in order to obtain funding in the design, development and delivery phase of the project. And as I've said before, there are sustainability requirements that are embedded into each gate within that process. In developing these requirements, we worked very closely with the sustainability team. It was their role to develop the requirements. And now they are responsible for reviewing and assessing the projects and their adherence to each of those requirements. So there was a lot of collaboration with the sustainability team. That engagement and collaboration with the sustainability team took the form of a number of meetings. First, to be clear on what our collective objectives were, and then to determine what the key requirements or considerations that the project teams need through the entire project's life cycle. We also finance played a collaboration role. So once the sustainability team had their requirements, we went and tested those requirements with the project teams. Again, these requirements, they need to be fit for purpose in order to succeed. And there was a risk that the sustainability team had a laundry list of requirements which either weren't practical for the project teams to address or the cost benefit just didn't stack up. Now that process has been embedded, we've had that embedded in our capital governance framework for over a year now. Part of the finance team's role is to revisit and revise those requirements with the sustainability team and the project teams. And we perform that once a year just to make sure that they still remain relevant and effective for the business.
Fantastic. And I think that's such a great point to draw out about the kind of the importance of collaboration between finance and sustainability, and to draw on the expertise of each kind of party as you're developing these kind of structures. Could you also give us an example of the kinds of environmental factors that are considered at each gate and how they shape and inform the decisions made?
Sure. So I guess we have a wide range of capital projects here at Sydney Airport that, can be civil in nature or say technology in nature. So depending on the nature of the project, the sustainability requirements do change. But maybe if I focus on civil projects, which makes up the majority of our capital investment here at the airport, an example that we have embedded in the process is a requirement for a minimum of 60% of the project's construction waste is diverted from landfill. So this requirement is clear right at project inception and is then embedded in the negotiations with our external contractors. Practically, what it is leading to is a more considered and innovative approach when dealing with construction waste. For example, we now reuse concrete from demolition on one project to resurface pockets of the airfield on another project. Another requirement is for all capital projects to set water and energy consumption targets for the project's duration that must be measured, reported, and ultimately not exceeded. Further, the project must demonstrate how it will reduce energy consumption once it is operational. Again, what we're seeing is a more considered approach by the project teams as to, for example, how to get construction materials on site, as they're now being measured on the emissions expended to get those materials to site. We're seeing discussions with external contractors regarding their mode of transport and being clear that, for example, we don't want diesel, petrol modes of transport to be used on any of our projects at the airport. Another example is built into our requirements a need for soil sampling and testing at project inception. Prior to building these sustainability requirements into the capital governance framework, project teams were getting caught out during the delivery phase, where they were discovering hazardous materials or waste under the soil because they hadn't performed the testing or hadn't performed it adequately or in conjunction with the sustainability team right at project inception. And so this often led to projects being paused and unforeseen costs that the project then had to cover. So the benefit of these requirements being embedded in the capital governance framework is that project teams know upfront, right at project ideation, what they need to plan and cost for. And probably the last example that I'll touch on is the green 5-star rating requirement that we have for all of our new buildings. Here in Australia, we have a voluntary sustainability rating system for buildings. And at SID, one of the requirements within our capital governance framework is that all new buildings must meet a green 5-star certification. This certification requires new builds to be built with lower emissions, to be powered once in operation by renewable energy, to be highly efficient, and to offset with nature. And again, this is leading to considered and innovative approaches by the project teams when it comes to designing and building new buildings across the airport precinct.
Fantastic, thank you. That's such a broad range of different kind of elements that you can include into the capital process. So that's really helpful, thank you. And one thing you haven't mentioned that much, but amongst other things, you're looking at embedding a shadow carbon pricing model into your capital investment assessments. Could you tell us about the thinking behind this and also the progress on its implementation?
Sure. I guess there's no question in my mind that embedding a shadow carbon price into our capital evaluation model will lead ultimately to better decision making, and will ultimately assist the airport in meeting the ambitious emissions reduction targets that we do have and have committed to publicly. I think the challenge we currently have is the perceived subjectivity first in measuring carbon emissions and second in pricing those emissions. And so we're very much on a journey. And although it is a finance-led approach when it comes to embedding, I guess, determining a shadow carbon pricing model and embedding it into our evaluation framework, we are reliant on the business for having the metering in place to measure these emissions. I guess in the first instance, that's probably taken more time than we had initially planned. Further, the pricing component is another challenge. Here at SID, we're working through at the moment what is the most appropriate source. And also, do we have an understanding of the potential volatility of that price and what that might do to our future investment decisions? So it's fair to say progress is slow and has been slow to date. But embedding a shadow carbon price into our capital decisions is considered best practice. So we will get there. It's taking a while.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting to hear some of the kind of practical challenges of the that implementation. And thinking about challenges more broadly, were there other challenges that you faced at the implementation stage, and how did you overcome them?
As I mentioned, it was a 6-month process to implement. One of the challenges that we had was moving fast and, quite frankly, not dragging our feet, which is always a risk when you're collaborating with other parts of the business. This was new for the airport, and the environmental sustainability requirements were developed from scratch. So to address the timing risk, we met regularly, often weekly, with the sustainability team. We were very clear with them on our timelines and milestones. And we ensured there was adequate time to get feedback from the project teams who were going to be the most impacted by these requirements. I guess on that note, the project teams were a challenge in the first instance. Introducing these sustainability requirements at each capital project gate was first met with resistance, as there was a perception that this would not only slow down the project's progression, but also add costs to the project. Because we did have early engagement with C-suite at inception of this process, we found that really useful, because we were able to be very clear with the project teams that developing and including these sustainability requirements had been endorsed by the CEO and the C-suite executives. And we simply needed, quite frankly, to accept this and move on and just get on with it. So we found that tone from the top very important in providing clarity and direction to support the finance team through implementing this process.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point to kind of recognize that it's really helpful to kind of get that support for these projects to get them off the ground. Just going back to Paysan quickly, I wonder if you could talk us through a few of the next steps that you're thinking about at OFI and where you're kind of going to go from here.
Yeah, so for us, I think we're kind of in a stabilization phase of the Capex ESG project. But I think what we're doing now is collecting feedback from our stakeholders post implementation. We wanted to get some inputs for them in terms of whether the Capex ESG framework is something that is adding value to their process. So I think it's quite heartening for us, actually, that we got some positive impact from our project engineers, and even one of them was saying that they're using that risk framework to assess now their suppliers. So I think that's one positive step, I think, for us, and we will continue to iterate the risk framework, because I think to ensure that the risk framework continues to be relevant, I think we have to keep reviewing that risk database. I mean, considering the evolving nature of the environment around us. So I think that's something that we continue to try to enhance, right? And our actually, in the BAU process, our finance sustainability team has actually taken over this particular process. So I'm more in an advisory role for our FOS team at the moment. So I think we're in a very good place. And actually, the next step for us is to elevate it and try to do what Christy has implemented. Is really also to put like shadow prices on the environmental impacts, like carbon pricing and shadow price water. So that's something that we are exploring. But I think we're already considering the challenges, I think, from our stakeholders. I think I'm hearing from Christy, I think those are very practical kind of obstacles that's going to kind of like take us more time in that assessment, because I mean, we really just want to make environmental impact a cost for our stakeholders. We want to incentivize them to kind of invest projects that are good for the environment. So that's one consideration for us, how to incentivize that and not just put a cost on the environment, but how do we incentivize them to put in more renewable energy into our manufacturing facilities, for an example. So that's under consideration now as the next step. I think there's a lot more for us to do, I think, in this area. So
Great, thank you. Yeah, and it's really interesting that kind of the turning it around to kind of be the cost of inaction, or how do you kind of quantify that and kind of get that message across, and the
yes,
incentivization,
exactly.
the opportunity, rather than because we all have a kind of propensity to look a lot of risk, but not necessarily the kind of the opportunity side.
So today we've looked at the practical steps that finance teams can take to incorporate sustainability into Capex decisions. And we will be sharing some of the A4S resources. So if you're interested in finding out a little bit more, these should appear in the chat function as we go through. As we've come to the end of today's webinar, I'd just like to thank our speakers again for their contribution, and thank you all for listening. As we run sort of similar webinars regularly, we are keen to get your feedback to help us make these as useful as possible. And I know that we were a little bit rushed for time, but thank you everyone for remaining to stay tuned in. And thank you very much to Christy and Paysan for really, really valuable insights. We really do appreciate those. Very practical as well. So people will definitely be able to take those away, I'm sure. We're going to leave it there, I think, for now. So thanks to everyone for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your day.